Hello, and thank you for joining me for this presentation on summary and analysis. My name is Justine Price O'Neill. I'm one of the writing and study skills tutors with Wake Tech's TLC, Tutoring and Learning Center. And so this presentation is about the differences between summary and analysis, and we're hoping that you find the information helpful as you are working on your writing courses and hopefully growing and improving with this information. All right, so let's go ahead and get started and look at our slides here. So the first thing that I'd like to ask you to do is to think about a book or a movie or even a show that you have seen that you're familiar with and describe it. So just you can think, or maybe even better if you can jot down a sentence or two about what you have chosen. And you can go ahead and pause the video here if you want a minute to think. But then once you've got that written down, go ahead and look at it and think, did you summarize or did you analyze? Okay, so when we're thinking about the differences here, summary tells us what the story is about. So if you wrote what the story was about with facts, then you provided summary. But if you went deeper into what you think about the story, telling us, what you thought about it personally, that's analysis. So, maybe saying how it was good or not. Now, there's no right answer here because I didn't specify whether I wanted you to summarize or analyze, but I think it's helpful to see the difference here between a summary, which we often hear referred to as synopsis, right? And analysis, which we might have heard of as a review. So this is one way where we see this kind of in real life, and we might even do this, with different things that we are summarizing or analyzing. So today we're going to talk about these topics of summary and analysis and look at a few different things. First of all, why are they important? Why are we talking about this? And also going into the differences between the two, because they are very distinct. And then I'll demonstrate how to go about each effectively with some practice activities. Now, you may have experience with one or both of these tasks, like I said, in real everyday life or in academic writing that you've done in the past or you're working on now. But it's important to realize that it's often in college writing when students are required to move from summary to more of analysis. So it's in college when you might be asked to do more than just provide the right answer by reporting or providing a summary. And instead, you'll be asked to think more critically. So coming up with your own arguments and your own voice. That is analysis. Now, some writing assignments that you are assigned may require you to do both, summarize and analyze separately, while others may require analysis only. So the summary might be something that is helpful for you to do and think about independently, but perhaps the writing assignment itself is supposed to be an analysis. So it's important to know the difference. So let's look at an example assignment, one that you might see in a college level writing course. So here's an example from an English class that requires students to both summarize and analyze. So here the instructor has given the purpose of the assignment to inform by summarizing and by providing a clear, reasoned response to the text. It asks students should end their introduction with a thesis statement that proposes an original claim revealing the purpose of the essay. For example, in Wonder Woman, Gloria Steinem explores ... Now, the summary paragraph, it says the summary should only reveal what the passage is about. It should not include opinions, analyses, or quotes. And then the analysis paragraph, on the other hand, requires you to think about how the passage is written and the author's technique. You will analyze what the author does to support the key points, include at least one in-text citation to support your analysis. So you can see here, this comes from the assignment sheet, and it's super important to read your assignment sheet very carefully and notice what the instructor wants you to do and where. So here we can see what the purpose of the assignment is and how the thesis statement should be written. We can see what is required in the summary paragraph, and then how a separate analysis paragraph requires much different things. So the first step is looking at your assignment sheet and understanding what you're being asked to do. Now, let's go ahead and look at some differences between summarizing and analyzing. So with summary, as we've been saying, there's a concise restatement of main points from the text. It focuses on what the original author has said. You can think of it as objective reporting, so no opinion. It's usually pretty brief, a summary, and it's covering the main points only, not going too deep into the supporting details. Now, an analysis, on the other hand, is a very detailed examination or interpretation of the text. It usually discusses how and why the author has made specific choices. It's a subjective evaluation, so this is your personal opinion or response. And it goes more in depth with details, and it explores things like meaning and implications. Okay, so very different tasks here, the two of them. Okay, so now that we know how summary and analysis are different, let's look at examples of how to summarize effectively. So we'll look at effective summaries first. When thinking of summary, you want to be asking and answering what questions, as you are essentially reporting on the topic. So let's take a look. So here are some examples of effective summary. We see the first one there says the lottery is about a town that comes together every year for a tradition. The townspeople draw a name, and the persons whose name is drawn is killed by everyone else. And then the second bit there says the black box in the lottery is used to hold slips of paper with the names of the townspeople. It is old and splintered, and every year the townspeople talk about replacing the box, but no one wants to break tradition. Okay, so for summary, remember, we are looking at things like answering, what is this about? And giving the main point and some supporting detail. And you can see that this is all very factual rather than opinion. It's just what happens in the story, not what we think about it or giving sort of any evaluation about it yet. Okay, now let's shift and look at examples of how to analyze effectively. So it's here where you should be digging a little deeper by asking and answering how or why questions. So here's some examples of effective analysis. The first one here, so same topic, The Lottery, a fiction story by Shirley Jackson, was written to portray the point that tradition often overtakes reason, and humans sometimes stick to traditions that are outdated or irrelevant simply because they don't want to make changes. Okay, so that's different than what we were talking about earlier. Let's look at the second one. The black box in the lottery is symbolic of death and tradition. It is the color black, which is the color to represent death. It is old and splintery, and it holds the names of the townspeople, one of whom will be chosen to die. In addition, the text says Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. The black box is symbolic not just about death, but it also represents tradition and how some people want to change it, but can't overpower the majority who insist tradition remain. Okay, so similar from the summary, except you can see how here the writer has gone deeper. They're answering, how does this story comment on society? They're making arguments and supporting the argument with textual evidence, that quote that comes right from the story itself. Okay, so you can see kind of the differences there through these examples and how they are on the same topic, but just doing different things. Now let's think about here, we have illustrated how it's clear that summary and analysis are connected, like we just saw, and that's sometimes the reason why they get confused. So it's important to remember that you can and should use the summary details to reach your analysis. So for example, if we look here, you can see that you can use the main ideas or events in the text, so that's your summary, to explore the deeper meaning and the implications and the techniques that the author uses. That's the analysis. So using the summary to move to the analysis is important. So to do that, you first need to complete your summary. So this is where you identify the important details, like what's the main argument or the plot. If you have a story, what are the key details? Okay, once you have your summary, then you can move to thinking about themes or arguments. So getting more into analysis, find the central ideas or messages that the text is trying to convey and what you believe the text is trying to convey. Not necessarily a right answer there. Then number 3, you're going to pose some analytical questions. So digging deeper by thinking, why does the author make the choices they make? What is the symbolism of the story? Things like that. Then you can make interpretations and arguments. So you'll develop your own interpretations or arguments about the text, thinking about maybe historical, social, or cultural context, maybe how it compares to other stories or works. And then you're going to support with evidence from the text. So specific details from the text, maybe quotes to show and prove that these conclusions are backed up with evidence. Okay. So here is a sample format for how you might structure an analysis paragraph using the summary to inform your analysis. So you'd begin with a topic sentence, of course, that states the main point of that paragraph. And then you would give an example to back up that point that you're making in the topic sentence. You'd provide some analysis as well as textual evidence, and then you would have your concluding idea to come back to the main point and wrap it up in relation to what you had just shared. And here's an example paragraph developed with that format related to the information we were just looking at with the lottery. So look at this paragraph. We have the black box in the lottery is symbolic of death and of tradition. Okay, that's our topic sentence. That's our main point. And then there's an example. The black box is old and splintered. It is used to hold slips of paper with the names of the townspeople. So there's that example from the summary, but then we move into analysis. The color black represents death, and the name of the person pulled from the box will be chosen to die. In addition, now moving back to another example, every year the townspeople talk about replacing the box, but no one wants to break tradition. Textual evidence to back up that point. According to the text, Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as what is represented by the black box. And concluding idea, the black box is symbolic not just about death, but it also represents tradition and how some people want to change it, but can't overpower the majority who insist tradition remain. Okay, so here you can see sometimes you might be asked to analyze, but you can use the summary to move to the analysis, and you can do that all in one paragraph with that sample format. Okay, now let's do some practice. So the first practice activity I want us to think about is with an advertisement. So take a look at this ad. Go ahead and look at it, think about it, and then I want you to write a sentence or two of summary and then a sentence or two of analysis. So think about what we have talked about the differences between the two. And this is a little different because it's a visual instead of text, but same idea. If you were asked to summarize and then analyze what you see here, how would you go about doing that? So you can pause the video here, take some time to think, take some time to write. Not a lot, like I said, a sentence or two of each. And then once you've got that written, go ahead and look at what you wrote. So first look at your summary. Did you answer questions like this? What is being advertised? What do we see in the ad? So basic, factual, to the point reporting. For example, we might summarize here and say this visual is advertising Gatorade. It has an image of Serena Williams playing tennis. There is also an image of a Gatorade drink in text that reads "The best are fueled by the best" with the color orange. Okay, factual reporting. And then look at your analysis. Did you dig deeper by answering questions like these? What is the underlying message of the ad? What tools of persuasion are used? So we might think by portraying a champion athlete, the ad is persuading the audience that they will perform better by drinking Gatorade. And there's an inspirational message in bright colors there that also persuade the audience through emotional appeals. Things like that. Now here you can see there's no right answer for the analysis, and that's the point. You're just making an argument and then backing it up with evidence. Okay, now let's practice again, but this time with a sample text. So let's look at this paragraph called Time in School. And so we have here, choosing to go to college is a good choice, but many people fail to take into account how much time is required outside of class in order to succeed. The main confusion is found in what I like to call the 80-20 rule. In high school, 80% of instruction and learning is done in the classroom and 20% is done at home. In college, this ratio flips to where just 20% of instruction and learning is done in the classroom, while a full 80% is expected to be done at home. Planning for this kind of commitment requires students to take an honest look at what they do every day and exactly where they will fit all the work into their schedules. With so many students balancing work and family with college careers, it has become even more important for students to make sure they plan accordingly so they can do their very best in college. Okay, so now if we're thinking about summary, if we were asked to summarize here, you want to ask yourself, what is the main idea? Now, in a paragraph, you can usually find that in the first or last sentences. So if we look back at our first sentence from the reading, as well as the last one, you can see some clues for what's the main point that the author is making. And it seems that they are making the argument that students are very busy, and also college is a very big load to take on, bigger than in high school. As far as time commitments. So people should consider their own time and realistically what they have time for to decide whether enrolling in college is a good plan for them. Okay, main idea. Now for analysis, again, we dig a little deeper and considering maybe some questions like we see here about purpose and audience and support. So we might explore how the author is writing to show the significant time commitment that college requires. Maybe they are writing for people who are considering returning to school or starting college. And he uses logic with this 80-20 rule as evidence, right? And you might also here explore your own personal connection to the author's argument and whether or not you agree with what is stated here. Again, for analysis, no one clear right answer, but when analyzing, you should be digging deeper and making an argument and then backing up that argument with evidence. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so of course it takes a lot of practice to think and write in these ways, and that's how you're going to get good at it. It's definitely not easy, and there are some common mistakes that you want to avoid. So let's look at some mistakes that students often make with summary and analysis, and then think about how to avoid these pitfalls. So for summary, a lot of times the problem is when there is too much detail provided, or there's opinion provided in the summary, or relying on direct quotes from the original text. So we don't want to do those things, but instead, an effective summary should focus on condensing the main points objectively and avoid adding any personal opinions or unnecessary details. Okay, and then for analysis, problems there are when we're summarizing instead of analyzing. So giving those factual main idea points instead of going deeper. Another problem is just lacking an overall thesis or argument in the analysis and lacking textual evidence to support the analysis. So going back to the text and providing paraphrasing or quotes to back up what your argument is. You want to make sure that you're doing that. So an effective analysis should include these things: a clear thesis statement, for one, and then support interpretations with textual evidence, and then explore the broader implications of the text. All right, and then another few things here about additional tips just to make sure that you are effectively creating your summaries and analyses. So a good idea when you are first reading the text that you will be writing about is make sure that you are annotating when you're reading. So taking notes right on the document itself or on a separate sheet, however you like to take notes, but you want to identify things like the thesis. What is the evidence that supports the thesis? Are there any visuals that are used? What are the key terms the author relies on? And also thinking about using signal phrases when you are summarizing within your work, something like according to Jones, dot, 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 completing that statement, but we're referring to Jones, who's the original author. And then ask yourself questions. You can jot these down right in your notes too to help you develop your analysis. So think about things like who is the intended audience? What is the writer's purpose? What types of support are used? And then how does the author appeal to the reader or persuade them? What message, bigger picture message is the text revealing? And overall, you want to be able to answer, what is my argument about the meaning of the text? And that is really your thesis statement. If you don't know what your argument is, you're probably lacking an argument and then you don't have analysis. Okay? So again, these things take practice, but that is some tips to keep in mind as you are working on this type of writing. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. I hope you've learned some helpful tips that you can take and use in your writing assignments. And remember that you can always reach out to the TLC for a one-on-one session with a tutor. You can visit our website that you see right here and schedule a meeting with us via bookings, and we can help you as you are working on any type of writing assignments, but especially if you are working on some assignments that involve summary and analysis, and we would be happy to help you with that. Okay, thank you so much again, and we hope to see you in the TLC. Thank you.